Okay, so hello Anna, welcome to my show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Um, for those of the people who might be watching and don't know who you are, can you start telling us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, that kind of stuff?
Well, thanks for having me. So I'm a PHP developer. I have done more than just PHP throughout my career, but this is pretty much where I keep returning. I've been a consultant for almost 20 years now. I've had a few jobs in between, but mostly I've been a consultant. So I work from home and I help people these days mostly with legacy applications.
Okay.
So if an application is 20 years old, maybe even more, I can come in, I can help, figure things out and polish it and make it ready for a later version of PHP or a more modern framework, or introduce a framework if there isn't one. So that's pretty much what I do.
Okay, that sounds
Oh,
really
and I
interesting.
also, yeah, sorry. And I also produce content on occasion. I've been lagging behind a bit on my videos. So I was trying to produce some videos. Had quite a good response from the community, but time is very hard to find.
Yeah. I definitely know where you're coming from because I have the exact same problem. So I was thinking while we were telling about this experience working with legacy code, I guess from all the what is out there, you probably find a lot of very old code bases, right? Being in PHP and everything.
Yeah. 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 I mean, some of the code bases, they're uh, something that is 10 years old I would consider fairly recent because they arrived at a time where we had, a package manager, we had like framework for testing or just frameworks in general. We had a lot more books written on the topic, specific to PHP also, because there's a lot of good general books out there, some as old as the 70s, so we don't actually need a recent book to learn best practices. But there have been sort of an explosion, I guess, around the web. And so initially it was a bit of a free for all, and people were putting applications together any way they knew. But in the last 10 years, it's been much better. But that is also legacy because not a lot of people write tests, for example.
Right.
But then also we could go much further back. 20 years ago, you had pretty much nothing. Some of the applications I get are written in basically PHP 4. Like you can see that started in PHP 4, was upgraded. I personally started with PHP 3, but there aren't many enterprise applications that I encounter that are written in PHP 3. Those have been, I guess, discontinued since then.
Right. So, but you do find PHP for, applications that are
In the
currently
wild,
running PHP 4.
yeah, PHP 4 is rare also. It's mostly PHP 5, but PHP 5 can be as early as PHP 5.2.
Okay.
I
Okay.
haven't in the last few years. I've rarely encountered earlier than 5.2, which is still pretty old.
Yeah, sure. And so I'm kind of curious. So when somebody approaches you with this kind of problem, what do they, what do they say, or do you? Let me rephrase that. Are you like approached by some technical person within a company, or maybe someone higher in the executive level? What the typical, cycle?
Well, it depends. I have the full spectrum. I have smaller entrepreneurs approaching me. I have people who would know how to open a ticket on GitHub. On the other side, I have people who have their own like DevOps department. So it's really all over the place. So
Right,
it
right.
depends. So sometimes I work with highly technical people, and sometimes I work with people who don't really understand how any of that works. But one thing they have in common, and that is the most frequent reason, is that people tell them that running an outdated version is not great for their security. And so that's where they're worried. They're worried about the liability. They're worried about, their business that they've spent so much time building could come crashing because of some silly vulnerability in an old version. And so they're ready to invest to modernize that. In some cases where people come to me for upgrading to a newer framework, that typically comes from developers because they could have trouble retaining talent or hiring new talent, which is also valid for like older PHP, because people like to work on more recent stuff. Like they would go into the industry, they would learn some of the more modern things, and then they cannot apply it.
Right.
So a lot of some of the drive comes from that, try to find people who actually are willing to help them with this application and not just run from it.
Yeah, I see. So I have a very silly question in my head, but I have to ask. So the people who approach you, they already know that they have something built using PHP, right?
Yes, they're fully aware of their PHP application, or that it has been built with PHP.
Okay. So that was kind of my initial question about people who were not so much technical, because sometimes it happened to me that somebody comes to me and I have this terrible application, I need help. But so I have to kind of start digging into what is this made of. So that's why when I was kind of curious about that. So cool. So let me go back a few. So how did you get started in development, programming, or did you go to college, or how did you get started in this world?
Yeah, well, I started way before I had the idea of becoming a professional. I was just always fascinated with computers, right? And I can go really far back. My first experience with a computer, I was 3 years old. It
Wow.
was a New Year party. We had, so I come from like a small village in Siberia, and we had neighbors who were a bit more fortunate. So they had a computer. I actually haven't figured out what computer that was, because memories from when you're 3 years old are not precise enough. So, and I was looking at pictures and I couldn't be quite sure. I think it could have been an Atari. I'm not sure really.
Okay. If you
Or
don't want
maybe
to,
before. I don't
if
know.
you don't want
Maybe
to say your age out loud, that's fine. But if you can give me some idea about what year it was, perhaps I can I can help you figure that out.
Yeah. Well, the year also depends on where you are in the world, because here, well, when I say here, I mean like for me, North America and Europe, people are more up to date on technology.
Mm-hmm.
Where I come from, people were 30 years late on technology. So
I
it's
come from
not a,
Argentina, so I think I can kind of relate to that.
yeah. I mean, I haven't seen a phone, or I haven't used a phone until, I think, until 93.
Wow.
But phones existed for a long time, right?
Right. You mean like a landline?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not even talking about cell phones.
Okay.
So just to give you an idea of where I come from.
Okay. You definitely beat me.
So yeah, back to this computer. So I played Snake basically, and my brothers, they played chess, I think.
Okay.
So, but not like I don't think it was an AI. I'm not sure really. So yeah, that was my first experience, and I thought it was really cool. So I mean, the impression I had of a computer is that there are so many possibilities. It's so amazing. Like I was mind blown by the idea of a computer. And so I always wanted one, but we weren't fortunate enough. So it took a while, and it's only when we finally ended up in Canada in '96 that then I started, pestering my mother about buying me a computer. So we eventually got one in '97, and at first I played video games, but very quickly I started, messing with the games and modding them, but like opening them in special applications you download, and you can start editing the assets. It was pretty cool. And so slowly I got into slowly, actually, just in a few months, I got into programming that way. My first experience was with Visual Basic 4. I was lucky to have some license because my father was taking some courses. So I got a license for that, and I got a book, and that was really cool. And I always tried to make games at first. Eventually, I got into well, making games in VB is a whole different story. It's not
Okay.
made for that, but I tried. I mean, as a kid, the possibilities were endless. So at that time, I was 11 years old when I started programming. And then I got into the web, with Microsoft Front Page and things like that. Learned a bit about Java applets and JavaScript and things like that. I mean, it was pretty basic at the time. Like even CSS was absolutely basic. Yeah, and so got into the web, eventually Flash, made some games with Flash, published them on my website. The thing I spent several years on was I was a big fan of Stargate SG-1, still am. I'm still rewatching that show. Uh, so I was a very big fan. So I created a fan site where like I would publish episode guides and things like that. And that's where I published my games based on that. But they were rudimentary games. I was like 13 when I was making them. But it was a lot of fun. And so yeah, so I just continued building things like that, for fun. And obviously, when time came to choose a career path, actually it wasn't quite as obvious as you'd think,
Okay.
because I'm a person who is interested in a lot of different things.
Okay.
I was thinking about becoming a graphic designer because I like 3D also, like doing 3D and animation. I was interested in theoretical astrophysics.
Okay.
I was interested in probably a whole bunch of other things that I don't even remember, but like everything I discovered that was kind of cool, I became almost obsessed with it. So the choice wasn't even straightforward at that time, but eventually I took a rational approach and I settled on programming. I thought, well, I already invested so much time in it. I've developed some skill already, might as well continue in that direction. And that's how I settled on programming. And so I went to college. So when I say college, you have to understand how it works here in Quebec, is that so high school is basically after 11 years of study. That's when it
Okay.
finishes. So you have like elementary, high school. So after 11 years of studying, that's when you can go to a college, which could be either a stepping stone before university. So you can do 2 years in preparation for university, or you can do like a 3-year, what they call a technical program.
Okay.
Not sure the exact terminology. And you're basically ready for the job market after that. I mean,
Okay.
you can still continue on after that, but I wanted something that was less general, more focused on the things I wanted, right? I was very eager to put my skills into practice, and so I didn't want to spend too much time in school. And yeah, so I did 3 years there. I did computer science and technology, or computer science technology. Anyway, that was the program I did at Vanier College in Montreal. And after that, I tried a bit of university, but I didn't feel like I was learning anything new. Like it was all things I've already learned or that weren't really relevant to what I wanted to do. So I just got through 1 year and then gave up and went to the job market. So yeah,
Cool.
that is my path up until I got into the job market.
All right. All right. Very, very interesting story. I guess I don't think many people can read it, but the part where you had such a wide array of options that can be not so common, I guess. At least within the people who are going to be watching this. Um, so so anyway, when exactly did you kind of crossroads with PHP in particular?
So PHP was a bit of an accident, I would say. So back when I was building my website when I was like 13, 14, I wanted to do some server side, right? So I did some Perl. And it was okay, but it was kind of hard, and we didn't have resources like we have today on the web, right? We didn't have Stack Overflow and easily accessible documentation, people doing tutorials on YouTube and stuff like that. Was YouTube even a thing back then? Maybe not even, or maybe like early stages. So yeah, there wasn't much available. Most of the information I needed to find was going to be on forums and not always in the language that I speak.
Oh.
So I had to translate even. Like, for example, I'd go to a German website, a German forum, and I'll try to just translate word by word a big thread, of several pages. So that was a bit of a hardcore mode, I would say.
I would call
And of
that.
course, I was a kid, so I didn't have a job, so I didn't have any means to buy books and subscribe to stuff to get my answers. So I had to rely on sort of open source or things that were freely available on the web. So I crossed paths with PHP when my brother, who also was interested in programming at the time, he was much older. He was like 10 years older. So he wrote like a website in PHP. I mean, very rudimentary also. He was just starting as well. And then he asked me for my help, and then I just went to do that. And it was a period where I actually had some spare time because it was kind of in between years of study. I just had a kid, and a kid in the early, like in the first year, is actually not as demanding, at least in my case. So actually I started to have spare time because, kid sleeps a lot. And then when the kid sleeps, what I'm going to do, right? I needed to keep my mind occupied. So I said, okay, sure, I'll do this. And so I started to do PHP.
Okay.
That's pretty much how it happened.
Okay.
Pretty naturally. And from there, some people noticed the website we were building. And so they reached out asking if I could do something for them. And so that's kind of how it started, word of mouth, right?
Okay.
And eventually when I finished, I think even before I finished college, I started my company and like a IT company, and didn't hire anyone, just myself.
Okay.
And so I started doing that for other people.
All right, cool. So do you remember what your first PHP project was?
Yeah, it was a dating site.
Oh, cool. So is it still online?
I don't think so. I would highly doubt it. It was like a very small thing. Basically, it was one person running it. It was a matchmaker. It wasn't really like a public thing. So the matchmaker will just use that to get people to explore. It was like a limited number of profiles, right?
Okay.
And people couldn't really talk to each other directly.
I see.
It was more about offloading some of the manual work of doing that.
I see. Okay.
It was more of a matchmaking tool as opposed to a dating
So it
site.
was like more for internal use, you mean, like for the
Yeah.
people running this matchmaking agency? Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So if you were to, what do you think you would say if you had to take a look at the code now?
I'd probably be embarrassed. I mean, if I'm not embarrassed at some of the code I wrote last year, then I haven't evolved enough.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. It's not about the code. Was I good enough at the time? Did I get better?
Right.
And did I do the best with the knowledge that I had at the time? And it's funny because I used to be more critical of my own old code, but working with legacy so much and not just taking over, right? And the other people are just gone and I can criticize them, behind their backs. No, it's more like a company comes to me and the people who initially wrote it sometimes are still around, right?
Okay.
And so I can get the story. So in some cases, I can get the story of how this evolved, and that kind of allowed me to gain this empathy towards older code, because people were actually doing the best they could.
Sure.
I mean, most of the time.
Yeah.
People do the best they can with the knowledge they have, and if they make mistakes, it's because they most of the time they didn't know any better. And so it's about teaching. So I also take this opportunity usually to explain to people how they could approach it today. I don't always get that opportunity, right, to work with the original team. But yeah, it did help me be a little, I mean, critical, but not like in a mean way, right?
Yeah, I see. Okay, cool. So when you're in such a situation where you are together with the original development team and you maybe express your opinion on the code that they've been working on, how do they take it?
Oh, I don't express opinions on code.
Okay.
That is just not going to be constructive. I mean, obviously, there's going to be like I don't get into things that could potentially be emotional. I mean, I could choose my words carefully, but it's still going to be what it is. People don't like being told, being like, I wouldn't like for somebody to take some code I wrote like maybe 2 years ago, while maybe I was learning and trying out a concept, and then start, giving their opinion on that. Like, I already know, right? I already know it's not good. So, so instead of opinions, what I like to do is to help people prepare roadmaps for the future. Basically, ignoring like they likely know what the problem with the code is.
Okay.
I can just recap it as a matter of fact. So, for example, I could say, well, this concept is maybe not very good for maintainability. For better maintainability, we can take this and this approach to bring this code from the current state into the desired state. Here's the desired state, and here's why this is better, right? And just give the steps to achieve that.
Okay.
And that basically takes the whole emotional the whole emotion out of the equation, and I don't have to worry about walking on eggshells and stuff.
Yeah. I see.
Because I'm also very direct, so that can turn pretty ugly.
Okay. I see. So, but when you say that they know what's wrong with their, or perhaps I didn't correctly understood, but is it like that? Like you feel like they already know what's wrong with their code?
Well, they feel the pain.
Okay, right. That's what I was
So
going.
from that perspective, like they know that it's a pain. They don't know exactly where it's coming from.
Okay.
They cannot necessarily talk about it in sort of, they cannot technically describe the process by which they feel the pain. And that's where I help them. A bit, I guess a bit like a psychologist would, right? Like, I mean, you feel the pain, you know sort of where the problem is, but somebody can really organize your understanding, organize your thoughts, and help you really understand the mechanism by which you're feeling this pain. And the pain could be, for example, in terms of the stress before deployment because you have to retest everything, or the fact that you cannot retest everything manually, right? So you're thinking, well, I don't think that what I change is going to impact that other thing, and therefore I'm not going to test it. And then something happens there. I mean, they feel the pain. Sometimes they think that is just part of the normal development process. And then I can explain to them, well, actually, no, it doesn't have to hurt, right? If somebody, let's say, it's like when you come into a doctor and say, well, I have this pain. I assume everybody has this pain. And the doctor says, no, it's actually not normal to feel this pain. And let's investigate. And they find something that you didn't think existed, right? So that's a bit how it feels sometimes, right? Just to be able to know from dealing with so many teams and so many projects is to know what what is well, and we have to define normal, right? Just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean it's okay.
Sure.
Right? So I know what could be a pretty easy to maintain situation or a pretty easy to achieve situation, and that's going to hurt a lot less, right? In terms of the stress. And, sometimes when you have stress from not being able to deploy, you're worried that you're going to cause a bug. You're worried that maybe you're going to corrupt some data. And if it does happen, then it's an unpleasant situation where now you have to not only fix the problem, but also fix the damage that it had caused.
Right.
And who knows, like there's also intangibles there. So yeah, people come to me because they're having these problems, and I help them eliminate these problems. But I don't necessarily eliminate it for them. I try as much as possible to give them the tools to do it themselves. So I would do like the initial part of the project is usually very hard because it requires a certain amount of experience. Otherwise, it's like a big first step, right? A big hurdle that they need to get through. Once they break through that, like let's say lay the foundations of automated testing, right? Because they don't know which approach. Do they need like acceptance tests? Do they need an even acceptance test? Do they want it, with this or that tool? Like there are so many things to consider. What kind of test to write? So it's something that I can do for them so lay the groundwork, and then they can and teach them how to build on top of that.
Cool.
So in the end, they're not gonna, if we compare it back to the doctor, like they're not gonna be in and out of my office all the time, right? I'm gonna fix the problem, and then I'm gonna give them the advice to be able to maintain a good situation for themselves.
Cool. All right. That sounds very, very interesting, and I guess the teams should be very much appreciative of this kind of help.
Well, they keep coming back, so I appreciate that. Yeah, I assume that yes, they.
Okay, cool.
But with like other projects, not necessarily the same.
Okay, cool. All right, so let me move you to another area that I want to. This is one question that I myself find a little annoying, but I like to ask it anyway. So it's what's pretty much in many people's heads. It's like you obviously really know your stuff and everything. So being there so many alternatives to PHP, why would you choose PHP over whatever, Python, Node.js, or I don't know, so many things that are currently out there?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to work with a whole bunch of languages, and I don't mean like do a little side thing, like actually work on a project as part of a team. So I worked on Ruby projects, I worked on Java projects, I worked on like ASP.NET projects. So I work on a variety of. I don't even remember every language I touched. So, and to be honest, I appreciated working with these languages. The reason why at least I think the reason why I go back to PHP, because I've been thinking a lot. I think it's the familiarity, first of all. I mean, it's the first language I started. It's like that old video game that you keep coming back to because you played it for like 15 years, right? I mean, sure, it's dated, but you know it and you're comfortable there. So that helps. Second, I think PHP has come really a long way. Like it has nothing to do with the PHP I started with. It's like completely changed for the better. And so there's no sort of pressing reason to leave, right? So like the choice is made just by default due to my history. There's no good reason to leave. And also, I appreciate the sort of knowledge I acquired about PHP, and especially PHP's evolution, which makes me uniquely suitable for this kind of job.
Right.
Because when I see an incompatibility, you take like a PHP 5 project, and you try to run it on PHP 8, and I see an error there, and that takes me back. Yeah, I remember 18 years ago, I was dealing with that, and I was wondering whether that was a good practice. But now it is forbidden, right? And now, but at least I know what the error message is all about, right? I know where to look.
Cool.
And that it would just be a shame, I guess, because if I leave PHP, I would be robbing all these companies of the opportunity to get their code upgraded properly. And I don't mean upgrade as in put in the new array syntax. I mean actually make sure that it works, both it doesn't crash and also that the logic is maintained, because sometimes you have logical errors that are introduced by upgrading.
Yeah.
That's kind of tough.
Okay.
So I have a lot of knowledge that have acquired over the years. So I know how this version works. I know the quirks of every single version since like PHP 5.0. I remember all of these things, so I know where to look. So it kind of makes me want to continue.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you convinced me. So is there something that you particularly like about PHP? Differently to other languages you may have worked with, or languages, environments, the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I would say that PHP has the absolutely best package manager. So Composer,
Okay.
like you cannot compare it to anything else.
Not
I don't
even
want to name any other, but like I've worked with a lot of different technologies, and this one is just wonderful. Like
Okay.
it is so good, so fast, and just works. I don't know how else to describe it.
Okay.
Right? When you go to other languages and it doesn't just work, then you kind of miss PHP. And what's nice about PHP is that I mean it can both be like a good and bad thing, but despite all the incompatibilities that have been introduced over the years, I still feel like it has better backwards compatibility than other languages, right? Obviously, if you take a more recent language, a language that popped in the last 10 years,
Right.
they had the opportunity to learn from the mistakes of other languages, and so they didn't start so far back. Let's say they don't get to make the same mistakes. Same with frameworks, right? Frameworks that appear today are not going to go through the same phase that the earlier PHP frameworks did, where version 1 is completely different from version 2. Same in JavaScript. So yeah, this is what I like, and it's also very easy to run. Like you don't need anything to run PHP. You just take any text editor. Of course, an IDE is nice, but if you're somebody who wants to, I don't know, switch jobs, or like a kid who wants to explore things, you don't need a license. You don't need anything. You just follow a tutorial somewhere online, and boom, you have a web application. So from that perspective, I like it. I mean, sure, other open source languages do the same. I just felt like PHP was really easy to start with.
Okay.
Obviously, not the only one where you can start without any tools, but
No, of course. I was just saying, from your perspective, what's something that you like. So okay. And is there anything on on the opposite side, like something you really wish you didn't have to deal with because of being around PHP?
yeah. So what do I see in PHP that I would like to change? Obviously, one day I would like for PHP to not have to rely to external static analyzers, and like have something that is built in, not for myself, but for others. Because for myself, sure, I will put in some static analyzer, and I'll have a report saying like, oh, here you define this type, but then you're trying to pass this type. So there's a mismatch, and it's going to tell you that it could cause problems. Or like you're trying to do an operation on something that can potentially be null, and so at runtime you'll have basically a null pointer exception. So you kind of want these things to be eliminated by default for people who are just starting out, because again, they don't know what they don't know, right?
Right. Exactly.
So they don't know any better, so they're gonna start with like vanilla PHP, and it's gonna be not, in my opinion, not quite enough to learn to build sort of enterprise level applications,
Right.
or applications that work reliably.
Okay. So one question that I definitely do like to ask the people I interview is around what tools can never be missing from your work environment. In terms of, I'm mostly interested in software tools. Like let me put you in the scenario that your computer suddenly blows away and you have to go out and get a new one. So okay, the disk is completely blank. What do you have to have installed in order to feel like at home?
Yeah, well, this is actually something I've had to do. So I had a computer not blow up, but overheat and melted some components. So I did have to go out once in an emergency and buy one. Or when I start a new project and I'm given a company laptop, sometimes for security purposes, and I have to install my own software. And so obviously I had to do it just yesterday, so I can I remember very well. So yesterday I was setting up a corporate laptop, so I had to install Git. I had to install PHP Storm, which is my favorite IDE. I don't get any kickback from that, but I highly recommend. I'm not affiliated with them. I will highly recommend it. It's just worth every penny. After that, I was installing Docker.
Okay.
And that's where I ended for the day yesterday. So Docker, so that I could run the application.
Cool. All right, great. So do you have like how do you call it, people you look up to, particularly within the community, or something like I always read this guy's blog or watch this guy's talks or something like that? People who you think should be followed by anyone interested in this?
Yeah. This may sound strange, but I'm the kind of person who tries to avoid sort of idolizing people or look up to people.
Right now.
Because it's dangerous, because then if the person sort of does something that you don't like, then you could inadvertently put into question some of the lessons, or it's dangerous. But I can tell you maybe about advice that I read from certain people that impacted me. Maybe that could be helpful.
Sure.
And I'm terrible with names, so actually, oh my goodness, you put me in the spot.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
I'm really terrible with names, but mostly the people who contributed to the Agile Manifesto.
Okay.
Pretty much all of these people are smart people with a ton of experience, good thinkers, and can present their ideas in a good way. So that would be helpful. Some of the advice I read, I do like to read Martin Fowler's. Is it his Blicky, or anyway? Or maybe I'm confusing two people, but like I know I've been reading his stuff quite a lot. Kent Beck, just I guess I actually don't follow people as much as I have lists. Right.
Okay.
So like I want to read on a topic, I open a list and I just read from there. But I don't actively search for search out these people or try to consume everything that they produce.
Okay.
I just, I don't know, for me, the content just somehow comes to me. Yeah, I don't really know. I think maybe if you had asked me this question 10 years ago,
okay.
and it's not to say that I know what I need to know. That's far from true. It's just that I used to be much more active in my search. Like back then I would maybe look up to people. But today I'm just trying to, like, I know the kind of information I'm looking for sometimes. And therefore I can do research and dig really deep, and sometimes would end up reading some really good material from people who have already died. Right?
Okay.
I remember I was reading a paper, I think it was published in like 71, 72 as part of my research for a video I was doing, because I wanted to have like other opinions, see if I can incorporate some new elements into my video. And so I read a paper from like 71 or 72 that was declassified since then. And I read that and I thought, wow, I would like to be friends with the person who wrote it. And then I realized that person has been gone for at least a decade. So
Too late for that.
too
Maybe in
late for
another
that,
life.
yeah. But and what's interesting is that also I would say, so to people who are listening to this podcast, what I would say is don't just look at people who are around today. I mean, that's more of a general. They will give you some new ideas and general directions, right? And from there, like follow their recommendations. And often, like some of the good, people that you can follow, they will quote books or they will recommend books. And so go in that direction, and you can go and from that book you can go further because people put their citations, and so you go back and back and back, and then you can end up really far back. But also don't even stop at programming. Like try to learn a whole bunch of things on a whole bunch of topics. And I mean, go as far back as philosophers from centuries ago. Some of their thinking is absolutely brilliant. Like it's the kind of conversation I would love to have at dinner, or like I would set aside an entire day to have that conversation with someone because it's really fascinating stuff. So the more you learn, I guess the more you broaden the types of things you want to learn and actually go there, because it's not just about programming and the technical stuff. It's a lot about how you interact with people, how you treat people, how you view ethics, and stuff like that. There's like so much out there. Like fiction, for example, I think is very important. Like science fiction, fantasy, whatever. It like the really good ones. Because I know there are some people I talk to who say, well, I don't watch fiction on television because there's nothing to learn there. And I'm like, no, this is a very narrow point of view. You go in, and I don't mean just on television and in books, like even video games could have some really good narratives there. And where they get you to make decisions, maybe not as impactful, but at least you get to experience some dilemmas. And the dilemmas are not like the trolley dilemma or something, like actual dilemmas that are realistic, a bit extreme. Obviously, that's why you want maybe like sci-fi or fantasy. It gets you into some extreme situations, or it puts characters into extreme situations. But also, there's all this context, right? So now they are faced with a decision, but it's not like a synthetic decision. It's a decision, you've heard all the parties express their viewpoint, their background story, and now it's a very hard decision, right? And to try and make these decisions or try to guess what their decision would be, or what would you do in their situation. That's an amazing sort of intellectual exercise. And that's why I love these things. So like, go broad, go really broad. Everything out there is going to make you better at programming. I remember I was once sitting, so I just finished a day of skiing, and I was sitting at the bar there, and I decided to take out my laptop and write something. And I wrote about how skiing made me a better developer. Like, I tried to draw some parallels, because there are certain things you learn, right, that are useful, or at least to sort of try and compare the two. But yeah, some of the things you learn in a completely unrelated domain, like gardening, you learn things in gardening that are going to be useful to you in programming. It's very surprising. Cooking, whatever. So like, learn everything there is to learn. And basically, the more you know, the more connections you're able to make between these topics. And so you can use one topic to reflect on another topic, if that makes sense. Yep. Maybe I'm going a bit too abstract right now. Maybe I sound like one of those philosophers.
Meta,
but I really love thinking.
I love it. I think you're right on the point. I mean, it's a great advice to anyone who really wants to, you know, get ahead in their career or whatever. It's like this attitude to constantly learning, and also I like what you said about the combining different areas of, or different domains of knowledge into a whole holistic vision. Yeah, definitely. I think it makes a lot of sense. So,
like, as an example, I remember, and that was already 10 years ago. So after doing a lot of programming professionally, because of how I learned to plan ahead, I played a game on the phone, some sort of board game against the computer that I haven't played in a long time. I didn't practice it, but I would win every time on the highest difficulty for some reason. And I thought that must be the programming, all this, you know, ability to think that allowed me to excel at a game, and vice versa. I would assume the reverse is also true.
Yeah, probably. Okay. This is great. I really don't have much more to ask you. It's been really great. One last thing I do want to say is, you know, of course, if you want to, the other way around, if the people watching this, they want to know more about you, you know, how would they go about it?
So my website, afilina.com, is a good starting point. It has links to my social media. It has, I believe it has links to my YouTube channel.
Okay.
And also I write as much as I can. Again, as much as I can, not as much as I'd like. I actually started a section so you just go to afilina.com, and then there's a section to learn. And that's where I just try to dump my knowledge, but like in an organized way. So not just like, but they're written a bit like blog posts, right? So they're like kind of easy to read, not too long. But I try to make like a sequence, right? Or I try to make things that, like, if you read all of these things, you get like maybe a broader picture. And it's something I'd like to do more. So I talk about like how to approach legacy, how to a few things about best practices and like testing. So I do try to sort of put my knowledge into words and put it there, but it's hard because sometimes I feel like I learn faster than I can write it down. So I think it's futile, and I'll probably have regrets at some point. But I do try as much as possible. Well, you know, like I don't want to end up 10 years from now, you know, and realize that I've actually failed to communicate all the things that I've learned, and maybe I'll die without telling them to anyone. That's my biggest fear, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that
I'm
comes.
still pretty young.
that's a chance you need to take. It's kind of a side effect of being constantly learning.
Yeah, I mean,
That's the way it is.
I'm pretty sure all the people who have written anything in their lives have had a similar thought at some point.
Probably. Okay. All right. Well, so thank you again. It's been great having you here. And for those who are watching, go ahead and take a look at Anna's material. You'll really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate your giving me the stage.
Sure. Anytime.